From the rhythm of our heartbeats to the melody of our favorite song, sound is all around us. It has the power to make us laugh, cry, jump out of our seats. But have you ever stopped to wonder, how does sound work? I'm Bernett for Wondrium, and in this episode of Perspectives, 4 experts delve into the intricate world of sound. From the nuances of frequency and timbre, to the ways in which our brains process and respond to sonic stimuli. We begin now with the captivating world of the violin and the physics that bring its music to life.
So where should we start? Let's start where we usually start, with an A. Here's an A on a violin. That's called a 440A, and we're going to talk about what that means in a bit. Now, instruments look different, but they all have something in common. When an instrument plays, something is vibrating, causing a wave of pressure changes that travel through the air and finally get to your ear. The mathematicians have studied vibrating objects extensively, and their work helps us understand the sounds produced by all of the instruments in the orchestra, and eventually that'll help us understand music. So when we hear something vibrating, what are we actually hearing? When we play a 440A, and here it is again, we might ask what frequencies are produced. Well, we call it 440 Hertz, and that's after the 19th century German physicist Heinrich Hertz. The higher the frequency, the more times the waves are vibrating per second. And in particular, for a 440 Hertz, the waves are coming 440 times per second. Now, you might think that what's happening is the string is just sort of going up and down 440 times per second. Surprisingly, it's a much more complicated motion than that, and there are a lot of implications to that. With help from Gordy in the audio booth, I'm going to play an A, and we're going to see the spectrum. We're going to talk a little bit more about the spectrum later. Now, what you're going to see is that we have peaks, and the peaks come at different frequencies, and they have different heights. So here again is an A. And what the spectrum is showing you is that the string vibrates at many different frequencies all at the same time. It's 440 Hertz, and then 880 Hertz, 1320. These are all the multiples of 440. The fundamental frequency is 440, and then we just add that again and again. Mathematically, we talk about this as an arithmetic sequence, and the important thing for us is that it's additive. To get from one to the next, we're just adding the fundamental frequency each time. How is it that a string vibrates in so many ways at the same time? Well, we actually have a demonstration to show you that. So imagine this vibrating string blown up to the size of this jump rope. And when we vibrate this string, the mathematics is telling us that it vibrates at many different frequencies. And we can see that on this string. Now, musically, this is called the fundamental. And what you want to notice is that there's a flat place in the middle. There's a place where the string is exactly horizontal. We can actually get the string to vibrate in a different mode, and that looks like this. Mathematically, we're talking about the second harmonic. Musically, we're talking about the first overtone. They're always off by 1 when you describe that. And you'll notice that it has one node in the middle. There's a place where the string isn't moving at all. It also has 2 flat places. These are places where the string is exactly horizontal. We can get a third mode vibrating here. Here's the third mode. Now, there are 2 places where the string isn't moving. Those are the 2 nodes, and there are 3 places where the string is horizontal. This is called the third harmonic, or it's called the second overtone if you're talking to musicians. I think it's quite surprising that our violin string is doing all of these simultaneously. Listening to a single string vibrating is like sitting in front of an orchestra of jump ropes. Each one is vibrating in one of these particular modes. That's why we talk about it as a symphony in a single note. A single vibrating string is actually many, many different frequencies.
If pitch perception in complex harmonic tones was just a matter of the brain detecting the lowest frequency in a spectrum, then pitch perception would be simple. But a classic phenomenon in auditory perception teaches us that things aren't that simple. If we remove the fundamental frequency of the clarinet tone, or a trumpet tone, or a vowel, what pitch do we hear? Let's listen to the original clarinet tone. And the same tone without its fundamental. They have the same pitch. the brain has constructed the pitch from the information in the remaining frequencies. This is called perception of the missing fundamental, and it's just one of the many ways that we know that pitch is a construct of the brain, not a physical fact about sound. Research with other animals like monkeys and songbirds suggests that they also perceive the pitch of the missing fundamental. So this constructive nature of pitch perception is likely to be very ancient in evolution. Most of the melodic musical instruments we're familiar with, like cellos, guitars, pianos, and saxophones, and so on, produce complex harmonic tones. Why are we so attracted to complex harmonic tones as musical sounds? Let me show you the spectrum of a human voice saying the vowel E with a fundamental frequency of 175 Hz. It's a complex harmonic tone. Now look at this spectrum of the vowel A, as in bat, again with a fundamental of 175 Hz. It's also a complex harmonic tone, but with a different spectral envelope, which is what makes it sound like a different vowel. I think one reason we find musical instruments with complex harmonic tones so attractive is that they are reminiscent of human vowel sounds. Our brains have great interest in such sounds because they're fundamental to speech. In brain imaging research that directly compared processing of musical sounds based on complex harmonic tones like clarinet and flute sounds to human syllables and vowels, Amber Lever and Joseph Rauschecker found a good deal of overlap in regions responding to musical and vocal sounds, in auditory regions of the temporal lobe.
Have you ever wondered why your ears are folded and grooved like they are? It's not for looks. The shape serves a very specific auditory function. These folds and grooves are perfectly designed for capturing sound waves in the frequency range of 500 to 4,000 Hertz. Hertz are just sound wave cycles per second. Do you know what type of sounds in our environment mostly happen within that wavelength? You guessed it, human speech. When sound waves travel towards us, they get funneled from the external ear, called the pinna, inward to the eardrum. Once the pinna funnels and amplifies the speech sound waves, they hit the eardrum. The vibrations there are mechanically transduced into action potentials in the cochlea, which are then sent via subcortical relay stations to A1 in the temporal lobe. The primary auditory cortex, also called A1, is located in the superior temporal lobe along a stretch of cortex called Heschel's gyrus. After a sound reaches your ears, A1 is the first part of the neocortex that processes those sounds. Just like the visual cortex, the cells in A1 that process these sounds are highly organized. Because sounds are vibrations of air molecules, each one has a signature frequency, just like different instruments in an orchestra have different frequencies. A1 is organized such that certain cells are dedicated to certain frequencies. The function of this topographical organization is to ensure efficient and accurate processing of sounds. This makes sense if you think about it. Most of the cells that process a certain frequency are located in the same area, so this allows for redundancy in signals, and the brain loves redundancy. Now, phonemes are more complex than single notes from an instrument, and they are processed in a network extending beyond A1, but the idea is roughly the same. Scientists believe that there are dedicated and specialized cell networks for individual features of the phonemes in one's native language, like ba and pa in English and u in Japanese. Again, the function of having specialized cells for aspects of native speech sounds is to help people process their language quickly and accurately. We now believe that babies are born with neural connections that allow them to immediately start paying attention to whatever sounds they may hear in their particular language environment. Over the first half year of life, babies start to expand the neural connections that are involved in processing those native speech sounds. But then, starting at 6 months, the brain starts to prune, like the trimming of a tree. It prunes the connections that are not involved in processing native speech sounds, while strengthening the ones that are. The end result is that after 1 year, there is a reorganized auditory system that has roughly the same number of synaptic connections in A1, but the nature of those connections has been radically transformed. At first, the connections allowed the baby to process all speech sounds pretty well, but after 1 year, the neural reorganization allows the infant to process her native speech sounds extremely well.
Timbre is the quality of sound that allows one to distinguish between two notes of the same pitch and the same loudness. If you play a flute and a violin, they could play the same note and the same loudness, but you would still know the difference between a flute and a violin. Why do you know that difference? Timbre. Here's a more formal definition. If you want to know a formal definition for any musical term, you turn to the Grove Dictionary of Music. And if you look up in the Grove Dictionary, it says this: timbre is, and I quote, a term describing the tonal quality of a sound. A clarinet and an oboe sounding the same note at the same loudness are said to produce different timbres. Timbre is a more complex attribute than pitch or loudness, which can each be represented by a one-dimensional scale, high-low for pitch or loud-soft for loudness. The end of the Grove Dictionary of Music definition includes the following line: timbre is defined as the frequency spectrum of a sound. Spectrum. That's where the math comes in. That's what we saw last time. We saw graphs showing how much of each vibration you heard, how much of each overtone. That's the mathematical connection to timbre. I also want to give you what's a negative definition of timbre. It comes from the American National Standards Institute, ANSI. They define timbre as everything that is not loudness, pitch, or spatial perception. That's a different one, spatial perception. Neither of the other definitions mentioned that. Spatial perception is that you can tell where a sound is coming from. If I hear a sound on my left side, how do I know it's on my left side? Interestingly, your brain does this amazing calculation. That sound reaches my left ear first, it comes over and reaches my right ear a little bit later. The reason I know that it's not two sounds is that my brain decides that's not two different sounds, one before the other. Instead, my brain realizes that it's one sound, and because it hit my left ear first, it must be coming from the left.
I think that one reason timbre is such a powerful perceptual attribute in musical sound is because of the crucial role it played in mammalian hearing for hundreds of millions of years, long before humans were on the scene. Our early mammalian ancestors were nocturnal creatures who must have relied heavily on hearing for navigating their world and identifying things in it. We know that one of the evolutionary innovations of mammals was having 3 middle ear bones, the malleus, incus, and stapes, instead of just one, like reptiles. This probably gave early mammals enhanced abilities to discriminate and identify sounds very rapidly. This would have been important for survival. As nocturnal creatures, they needed good night hearing, the ability to identify objects by hearing alone. Was that the sound of a delicious insect they could eat? Or a small dinosaur predator? Or a member of their own species? These judgments depended on quick and accurate processing of timbre.
Amplitude, or loudness of sound, is measured in terms of decibels. Absolute threshold for hearing is 0 decibels, with every 10 decibels corresponding to a 10-fold increase in sound. A whisper is about 25 decibels. A normal conversation is about 60 decibels, and a subway or train is about 100 decibels. The outer ear channels sound waves produced by air molecules through the auditory canal, causing the eardrum to vibrate. These vibrations then travel to the inner ear, which generates neural signals that are sent to the brain. Hearing, at perhaps the most basic level, can alert us to potential danger, the rattle of a snake, the roar of a train. We also form fast impressions of people based merely on the tone of their voice. People consistently perceive men with low-pitched voices as stronger and more physically attractive. Some research also suggests that lower voices in men correspond with higher levels of testosterone, suggesting that lower voices could also be a sign of increased dominance and aggression. These traits historically have been evolutionarily adaptive, leading to such preferences even today. Another explanation is that lower voices appear older, which could be a sign of experience and wisdom. In one study, political scientists recorded both male and female voices saying the sentence, "I urge you to vote for me this November," and then digitally altered the pitch of the recordings, creating a range from a low baritone to a high soprano. 400 people then listened to either the male or the female voices and consistently rated the deeper voices of both male and female speakers as more electable.
In many animals, low sounds indicate aggression or dominance, and higher sounds indicate appeasement or deference. For example, think of a dog growling versus whining. The low growl is an aggressive signal. The high whine is a sign of begging for attention. These ideas were first explored by the psychologist Eugene Morton in the 1970s and elaborated by the linguist John Ohala in the 1980s. Think about how humans use their own voices when trying to sound dominant and confident versus deferent or uncertain. Part of what makes Darth Vader sound so menacing is the low, resonant voice of James Earl Jones. These psychological qualities of low versus high pitches may stem from a connection between body size and pitch. Larger animals, like lions, tend to make lower sounds than smaller animals, like house cats, because they have larger vocal folds. When animals want to appear aggressive or dominant, they usually want to seem bigger, and making lower sounds can convey an impression of a larger size. When an animal wants to appear smaller, making higher sounds can convey an impression of a smaller size. These ancient associations of high and low pitch find their way into music. If you want to write a musical theme that sounds menacing, you're probably not going to score it for piccolo. And if you want to write music for a scene of a child playing joyfully, you're not going to rely heavily on trombones. These decisions seem intuitive to us, but they're more than just convention. They probably reflect associations built up over millions of years of evolution.
Thanks for watching. If you'd like to learn more about the topics in this episode, the full list of series that these clips came from is in the description below. You can watch them all now on Wondrium.